Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode. Today I thought we'd sort of change things up a little bit and go for a humongous camera, and not the prettiest camera at that. I don't think even its mother would love it. This is the Kiev 6, sometimes called the 6C, sometimes called the 6S, sometimes called the 6 TTL. This is a Soviet Union camera. It was made in the Arsenal factory in Kiev, which was basically a munitions plant, but they also produced other Kiev cameras, like the Contax copy, although it is really a Contax because it's Contax equipment, the Kiev 4. So yeah, Kiev 88, one of those as well. So yeah, it was an arms factory that they kind of repurposed part of it and started making cameras. This is not a copy of the Pentagon 6, but it was developed at about the same time and appeared on the market with the waist level finder in 1971. And this came out, this is the TTL Prism, it has interchangeable finders. This came out a few years later and the camera was renamed the TTL. Unique thing about it is the shutter release is on the left hand side, so if you're a left-hander you might find this camera easier to use. The later model, the Kiev 60, which was an updated version of this, they moved the shutter release over onto the conventional right hand side, but it's one of the very few cameras I've ever seen that has a shutter release on the left hand side. These were made up until the early 2000s. The serial number tells you the year of manufacture, and this one begins 79, so this is a 1979 camera. It takes 120 film. The 6 can take 220 film as well, although you can't really get 220 film. The later version, the 6D, only takes 120 film. It shoots 6x6 square format negatives, therefore 12 on a roll. It has a Pentagon, well, it shares the mount with the Pentagon 6, and that mount's quite commonly referred to as the P6 mount. Very easy to attach lenses. You just turn this ring, a bit like a breech lock system. The lens comes off. There's no electronics, it's completely manual. The only electronics will be in the finder. This is the battery compartment, and this has a CDS based meter in it. So all you have on the lens is the diaphragm control. That's the only function that you have, and an aperture ring and focusing. The lenses are pretty good actually, but obviously the Carl Zeiss ones that you can get for the Pentagon 6 are considerably better quality. That goes without saying. Point of entry, very, very cheap. There's a Kiev 60 on eBay, it's been on there a few weeks now, and it's a £60, and that's with both finders as well, so it's very, very cheap way into medium format. They're not really known for great reliability. You might be lucky and get a good one, you might be unlucky and get a lemon. They have their idiosyncrasies, they're completely mechanical. They need exercising, they don't take very kindly to being just left sat, and particularly being left sat in the cocked position. The mirror is not instant return, so in common with a lot of medium format cameras, when you trip the shutter the mirror will flip up and you won't see anything afterwards. So that's an issue that needs to be sort of borne in mind compared to, say, a rangefinder where you're watching everything that's going on. So let's give you a quick overview. There's not an awful lot to really go through on this camera because it's fairly straightforward and simple. Obviously shutter release, threaded for a cable release. We have a flash synchronization socket. It synchronizes at 1/30th of a second, which is a fairly common speed for medium format cameras. Already shown you the lens mount. On this side we have a stop down lever, which is quite nice. Depth of field preview. Lug straps. The back is pretty uninspiring. On the top here we have the film advance. This is a device that tells the camera whether you're shooting 12 exposures or 24. You can lift this dial up and change it whether it's 220 or 120. far side is the shutter speed dial. This ranges, we have a B setting, but it ranges from 1 second, no, half a second on these, through to 1,000th of a second. It's a focal plane cloth shutter. The Russians never really got to grips with leaf shutters. You see that on the Kiev 88, which is commonly known as a Hasselbladsky, but again it's a focal plane shutter. So on this camera we have the usual pop-up waist level finder, which I really don't like using because it's quite big. It's got quite a big field of view, and this one's quite good because it has the pop-up magnifier. If I can get it to pop up, there we go. And the pop-up magnifier covers the whole area. It's not just a little bit that just comes out. So it's quite a good pop-up magnifier. And it also, interestingly, has a sports finder. And the great thing about this is you can also focus while you're using the sports finder. That's a bit like the Rollies do that as well. Sorry, the Rolly Flexes do that, where they have this separate area where you can focus, and then you can look directly through to actually take the image. So the waist level finders are quite nice. To take the Prism or the waist level finder off, 2 buttons, one each side. Push those in, and it just lifts off. Very, very simple. Push that in, take the cover off. Again, on this there's one that side and one that side. This adds an awful lot of extra weight to it. With this and the lens on, you're talking 2 kilos in weight. It's a very heavy chunk, and there's a lock button on the side here. You just move that round, and that's a Prism attached. Has an onboard meter. This one doesn't work, in common with a lot of them. Just use a handheld meter. It doesn't connect to anything. You have to set the ASA or the ISO. You have to then read the light. There's 2 LEDs inside when they're both lit up. That shows you correct exposure. Left hand one under exposure, right hand one over exposure. When they're both lit up, correct exposure. And you have to set that with this dial. You twist it until both lights are on. You read off the settings, and then you have to manually set them. There's no connection between the Prism and the camera body at all. On the bottom, we have, this is quite typical for Russian cameras, we have the double lock. And this tripod bush, not the standard size, you need to use an adapter. They're available, they're cheap enough. That opens up the back, you can see inside. You can see massive shutter curtains. This is obviously where your fresh film's going to go. It's going to come across past the shutter onto the take-up spool. If I cock it for you, you can see the curtains. With these, don't take your finger off, just bring it back nicely. And always, with any Russian camera, before you change the shutter speed, cock it. If you start changing shutter speeds with an uncocked camera, you will ruin it. There's one thing that applies to all of them, no matter what make of Russian camera it is: always cock the shutter before you change the shutter speed. Failure to do so will kill the camera. So I've set it at 30th, and you can hear the sound and cover your ears. It is not discreet, and it's extremely heavy. Right, let's load this with some film, and we're going to put some nice fresh HP5 in it. I've got a couple of new lenses for the P6 mount that I want to try out, including the 30mm fisheye, so I'm quite keen to see how they work. So we'll stick the film in this and see what we get. Because there's no sprockets on 120 film, you've got to be really careful when you load it. It doesn't come in a light-proof container. It comes on this, you should probably know this by now if you're watching this channel, it comes on this roll, and it's rolled tight, And obviously you don't want light getting in on this side and this side. If you're going about carrying film all day, I do recommend that you get one of these. This is only a 5 one. They do a 10 one. This is for carrying either unexposed or exposed rolls of film. Obviously it's light tight, watertight, etc. It's quite a good idea rather than having this just rolling around in your pocket. There is a company making metal ones of these, but they're over £100 or something, which that's crazy. I think this was about £5 on eBay. So you want to keep the film tight. Big issue with these cameras is film spacing, either overlapping or too much space between them. So you need to keep the film tight. When you pull these things out at the bottom, that should release the spool. So you've got to make sure that you keep the film tight. If there's any slack in the film, you will end up with uneven spacing. So what I like to do is I like to start it on the spool before I actually load it into the camera. And although it's not the normal way of loading one of these cameras, you want to keep it tight. If you don't, you will have spacing issues. It's common with the Pentagon 6 as well, that has the same issue. So wind on. And you just use a ratchet style, don't take it all the way round. You can ratchet the advance on these, so you can keep it nice and tight until the arrow lines up with the red. You can go slightly before the red and get an extra shot on the film. And then we close the back. Oh, it's a struggle. Okay, fire the shutter. We have a frame counter. Which is now reading 1. I can set the ASA and whatever, but I know it's HP5. There's no place for a reminder tab. So I'll just rip off the back of the box. And all I do is I just stick it on the back with a bit of sellotape. That way I know what film is loaded. I'll use a handheld meter. I'm not going to use this. It adds too much weight to the camera. It makes it look way too heavy. Clip there. You can see they're very, very basic in design. There's no finesse to them at all. I can clip back onto there. That folds down. A lot lighter, a lot easier to use. So there we go, folks. That is the Kiev 6. And yeah, we'll see what sort of results it can produce. It's a cheap way into large format, medium format. The lenses, there's a huge variety of lenses all the way up to 500mm, but you wouldn't want to carry that. You wouldn't really want to carry much over the 150 really, and the 150 is a heavy lens. Wide angles, there's a 50mm and a 30mm, they're quite widely available. The Carl Zeiss lenses do fetch a premium, because obviously they're Carl Zeiss lenses. But yeah, it's quite an affordable way into medium format. Personally, I recommend a twin lens reflex, something like a Rolly cord or an auto cord from Minolta. Has the waist level finder, doesn't have all the complications of the shutter and the Soviet build quality. You know, they're a lot better built and a lot simpler, and produce just the same results really. But if you want interchangeable lenses, interchangeable prisms, then this isn't a bad choice to go for. Hope you enjoyed. Any questions, comments, queries down below, and I hope to see you in the next one.